Now we're live. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another exciting episode of Our Daily Magic. What Our Daily Magic is a magical space to enable you to unleash your magic. We are all magical in our own unique ways. And what our intention is with these podcasts and also with our group is to find ways so that way you can be able to cultivate more magic into your life. I am one of the half of the co-hosts. My name is Dell, and
you are most certainly a whole. I'm the other whole as well. Okay. That's not what she said.
Oh my God. Already. Wow.
And my name is Kai, and we have a super magical guest today by the name of Laura Foltz, who happens to be located, hello, in Chicago. And Laura is a certified holistic health coach and does many, many magical things. But what I'd love to do is allow Laura, please share what you feel is relevant to our conversation today and what has you on fire.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. So like you said, I'm a certified holistic health coach, and I really love working with people who have a lot of information. They know what they should be eating, but they're not doing it and they don't know why. So really helping them figure out where that disconnect is from wanting to use food more for nourishment, but are currently using it for other reasons, whether that's for emotional reasons or because they're bored, stressed, whatever that might be. So helping them transform their relationship with food and getting to the bottom of why they self-sabotage or falling off track and lacking willpower, and helping them see that it's not just that they're lacking self-discipline and motivation, because there's so much more to it. And really what lights me up is doing just that. Like, I love having the conversations with my clients, helping them get clarity, helping them go from feeling like they are feeling somewhat hopeless that things can change because they've been through this process for so long of trying to lose weight or trying to get to the bottom of their patterns around food, because typically it's something that they've been dealing with for a long time. And when they can really connect the dots and see why they're eating out of alignment with their goals and helping them to find a renewed sense of hope that things can change, it really lights me up and gets me so excited when they really are starting to, there's usually a little bit of skepticism when we start working together that things will change. And when that skepticism starts to decrease and they are getting excited about the path that they're on, that lights me up like crazy.
The excitement does a lot.
I was just about to say that right there is a magic power that you have. So first question I have for you is, how did you discover that magic power?
It was definitely a process, because I'll start with the fact I feel like my business kind of found me, and it was definitely a process. And I think a lot of people in the entrepreneur space that are in self-development, their business typically finds them. But I really struggled with my weight since I was 12, went through every diet that possible, started my first weight loss program when I was 13 with my parents. And it took me a long time to lose weight, but finally in 2008, I was able to lose 60 pounds, was keeping it off. And even though I was keeping it off, so at that point I was working in advertising and found people coming to me, whether it was my friends, my family, or coworkers coming to me, asking me for guidance on how I was staying so motivated and was able to keep up my willpower as I was going through my weight loss journey. And I really enjoyed talking to people about that. And so I was maintaining my weight, starting to explore what I wanted to do in life after advertising, and learned about health coaching, decided to get my health coaching certification. And at that point, it was now about 5 years after I had lost the 60 pounds. And even though I had more information than ever, I was still maintaining my weight. I was also working within like a 2 or 3 pounds from my goal, and was doing what I call working the system, where I'd eat really well for a while. Then I'd say, screw it, eat whatever I wanted to, have to rein it back in again, and then have to get back on track. And it was such an exhausting cycle. And at that point, I met my health coach that I started working with and started to explore my relationship with food to figure out why I was self-sabotaging and why I was stuck in that cycle. And at that point, that's when everything kind of aligned, and was when I realized that that's really what I wanted to do, to help other people, because I had the success with my weight loss, but I was still exhausted by food. Like, I was thinking about food a lot. I was sabotaging myself. And so it was confusing because I had so much information and I knew what I was supposed to be doing, but I wasn't actually doing it consistently. And as soon as I started to work through my relationship with food, that's when things kind of aligned. And I decided that this is what I really wanted to do, to help others, to help them figure out why they are in those patterns too.
Amazing. I love what you mentioned because it resonates so much, the relationship with food and like the emotional eating that could potentially happen. So, and I know this is going to resonate with a lot of people who are listening and whenever they listen to it, because there's a lot of people out there who have that problem going on with the relationship with food. So how are you able to start to shift that relationship with food? Like, what was the first step for you? And then what was the journey for shifting that relationship to where you are right now?
It's definitely a process, and it's an emotional one. It's a vulnerable one, which I think also helps because I've been through the process. So as I'm working with my clients, then I can relate to what they're going through, which I think is really helpful for them. But for me, I think one of the biggest things was throughout the process, we're really looking at what people's triggers are, what their story is. And so there's a story that was created earlier in our lives that when we didn't have the full context of what was happening in the situation, we made it about us and we internalized it about ourselves. And so for me, my story, identifying that was huge, to be able to see when I was eating out of alignment with my goals, because for me, I was bullied when I was in middle school and high school because of my weight. And at that point, I developed a story around not wanting to be misunderstood, because the meaning that I made around being misunderstood was that I would fail and be rejected and end up alone. And so any time in my life as an adult or through my teenage years, when I felt misunderstood in some way, and it could have been something really simple, but if it felt like I was at risk for being misunderstood, or if I actually felt misunderstood, those were times that I would eat. And just having that clarity and awareness of what was actually happening, and realizing that it was a story and it's not who I was, that made a huge difference, to be able to see that it's not something that's wrong with me and that I'm lacking the motivation or the willpower, that there's actually something deeper, a deeper emotional vulnerability that's present, that I can now understand, see it, and then get more information if I needed to see, was I really misunderstood, or was that just the meaning that I was making of the situation?
What do you think? My mind is blown. So I was like, save me. I'm integrating that. That was powerful. That relationship and being vulnerable and bringing awareness. And like you said, like when the situation happens, we could potentially limit it to just our own story and our view from something previous. Like, wow.
Yeah. And I find it's really interesting because as I'm working with my clients, I find that some of their stories developed as early. I've had some clients, their stories developed at 4 and 5 years old. And so it's super powerful. And a lot of times we think that because it's something that happened so long ago, and a lot of people have gone through therapy and have done a lot of work on themselves, and yet there's still the story that is controlling them in some ways, and they might have healed aspects of it, but it still might be controlling them around food or their body image or things like that. And so it can be really powerful to identify what that story is, so that they can see how it still is driving them. It's served them well in certain areas, in certain ways. Like me being bullied, I always thought that I had overcome that and it made me stronger, and I just didn't think it really had an impact on me. But as I did this work, I realized how defensive I was. And through doing this work on my relationship with food, it really helped me soften a lot, and also seeing how it had still wounded me in certain ways emotionally, and how it was still controlling me in some areas as well.
Do you think that awareness is enough, to cause the shift?
It's definitely a huge, we say that clarity is not only a tool, but it's also like, it's a tool and it's the process. And so we do a lot of self-exploration and a lot of discovery and unearthing, but then we also need to digest what comes up, and we also need the tools to figure out exactly. We also need the tools to help, so that what we really want to do is we want to self-author. So right now we are functioning more in like this, when we have our story that's controlling us, we're functioning more from like the socialized way of being and how we learn to be safe in that story. And what we want to move towards is more of self-authoring, so that you're doing the choosing and you're rewriting and now self-authoring your version of the story, so you don't have to be stuck in that process. So yes, clarity is a huge piece of it, and there's more that needs to happen on the back end so that we don't continue to be controlled and stuck by that story as well.
Yeah. For me, it's like once you bring that awareness to it, because at those moments, like for your example of being bullied, I've been bullied before too, and going back into those moments of it, that part of us, that child part of us, needs love, needs that reassurance, and to be able to be in that circumstance, to be that friend for them and integrating that new relationship can help to shift it as well, bring the love in that situation. You have blown my mind from the beginning of this conversation, because just how synchronistically I never put it together. And I say it all the time, just how the way you show up with one thing is the way you show up in everything else. And in terms of relationships, so many times you think of a relationship as a partner, like that type of relationship, and never really bring more awareness to the other relationships that we have with these other conscious beings or conscious energies, like relationship with food or whatever it may be. So like, this is pretty profound just hearing about this.
And even our relationships with ourselves too, because a lot of times we aren't, like one of my clients that I've been working with recently, she didn't even realize how much she was accommodating other people. And she had forgotten about what her needs were and what was important to her. And so by helping her even see that she was accommodating other people, she has her own business. So she's an entrepreneur, she's married, she's got 2 kids, and she's been doing so much for other people that it has made her feel out of control. She started to realize how much feeling out of control around life was also leading her to feel out of control around food. And so it's interesting, because food is really just the lens of what we're looking at, but the work that we do is so much deeper than just around food. It really does have an impact on people's relationships, on their careers and stuff, because a lot of when we are feeling out of alignment with our food choices, it's usually that we're feeling out of alignment in other places in our lives as well. So it all is so connected.
Yeah. Do you feel like the relationship with yourself can dictate the shift with these other relationships? So like, for example, with your clients dealing with the food, is the food just a reflection of what's going on inside of them that they need to take a look at?
Yeah, because typically we use food as a way to either numb out if we are feeling some level of discomfort. It can be a distraction. It can be if somebody has a story around needing to be productive. If somebody's feeling bored, they might start to eat because it's a way for them to be productive. Or if somebody is a big avoider and they procrastinate, and it might just be they've built up and have gotten so overwhelmed from their to-do list or something that's on their plate. So then they go to food because it's something that will help them be productive and eat, and can also help not to feel that discomfort. So food can play such a huge array of and a huge range of roles for us depending on what we're feeling. But it's usually because of something else that is out of alignment in our lives, or how we're feeling with something in our lives or about ourselves too.
I have a feeling that as I start talking about this, I might answer my own question. So I'm going to listen to myself while I'm saying this too.
Sometimes just talking it out can really, like, people come to their own conclusions for sure as they just like talk it out and have somebody to share it with.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Totally. So I was mentioning before we got started with the podcast that I was a competitive bodybuilder for 3 years, and it was a great time, really experiencing, like, it felt like actualizing my potential, just like the really amazing things that we can do with our bodies. And then when I decided to leave the sport, I felt like I could do anything. Like I could go back, and into that diet and have the same body and, do the same things, but just not be on the stage and in the competitive circuit. And that's kind of how I've felt ever since then. And I think that was like 2015 when I ended that. And so the general feeling was like, oh yeah, I can do anything. And then I started just saying, but why? What's the point? Like, yeah, I could do that, but, and reach all these goals and make all these, like shoot for these numbers, but I just didn't really have a real good reason. So I would start and be like, yeah, I'll just go back and, have the bodybuilder body. And then I'm like, well, why am I even doing this? I just want to enjoy my life. And then every meal became like the epic cheat meal. And then I'd go back again, and it would just go back and forth, like not really having a point or a purpose.
Yeah. And so what's interesting is with that, so the fact that when you were checking in to see like why you were actually doing it, it wasn't really aligned with what you really wanted. And it sounds like there was that you were having the desire to have like the bodybuilder body, or like, I guess, what was leading to what were the times where you would think about, I want to get back to eating the way that I was eating when I was competing?
Well, the context is that I was like a super achiever. So, like whatever it was that I did, I shot for, 110%. And I guess if there was a period of time where I just wanted to feel accomplished, I could absolutely say that, that I had an addiction to results. And if I wanted to see some results, what would be awesome is that I would go back, I would get results really fast, and I'd be like, okay, that's enough. And then just go right back.
Yeah. What would it mean if you weren't being productive or you weren't achieving?
Yeah, I don't know.
Because so anytime where you felt you weren't being accomplished or you weren't achieving, that's when was it then that you would really think about like, well, this is one area I can control? Would it typically come up when you were feeling like you weren't necessarily having control in certain areas of that accomplishment or achieving, that you would then think about, well, let me get this food stuff and get back to that place that I was at with my body?
Yeah, control and like purpose. Those two things felt really intertwined. It's like, oh, I want to feel purposeful, so I'm going to do this.
Yeah. So this is such a great example of how there's so much more to the food, because it seems like it's like, oh, I just want to get back on track. I've got the motivation. I can just go back to where I was. But there's so much more behind it, right? Like if you were lacking a sense of purpose or felt like you were out of control someplace, it's like, well, this is one area that I can control, and I know that I'll feel purposeful and accomplished. And so I'll just go back into that. And then that's where it can also become like a cycle or a spiral too, because then you get that control, purpose, and accomplishment. And then it's like, okay, I've achieved that. Now I'm just going to let go of the reins for a little bit. And maybe you felt that purpose or accomplishment someplace else too, or you just got your little fill over there. And then it's okay to like step away from that for a little bit. But it's not just about the motivation. Like there's much more behind why that cycle would happen every so often.
Absolutely. And I'm just curious if, like, I mean, there are tons, it seems like there could be like tons of archetypes, for things that could, that could potentially happen with clients. And I don't know, just for some reason, I feel like this must be some kind of common archetype. Like I also have the urge to just, want to figure it out. And what I've let go of recently is figuring it out.
Yeah. I mean, it can be, a lot of my clients are type A and perfectionists. And so, it's definitely something that they feel like they've accomplished so much in their life and are accomplished everywhere else. And it's just this one area of their lives is the one thing that they just can't seem to get control over. So it's a common thing. But then also, I mean, if it's not really controlling you anymore and you just feel like it's not something that you have to figure out, it's not something that everybody does need to figure out. If it's something that you feel like isn't controlling you, you have a decent relationship with it, or it's not really having a huge impact on your life, then great. If it's something that does feel like it's controlling you, you feel like you can't live your life to the fullest and you can't live in your daily magic. I'm just going to use that. If you can't show up 100% for yourself, your family, your friends and stuff, then it is something that we want to explore. And if there's a lot of guilt and shame, or you are feeling like you're losing that sense of hope, then we do want to explore it. But if you do feel like it's really not controlling you, then great. No reason to look at it any further.
How do you feel?
I think that that's what I would like. I would like to, to feel that way. Maybe I'm on my way there, but it's definitely a thing.
Yeah. And I would be so curious and it might be something to just think about and explore, of like that sense of accomplishment, control. Where else does that show up, or where do you feel like there's areas where you're lacking that? And then seeing what it is that is at risk, or what are you afraid would happen if you don't have the control or accomplishment in your life, because that is typically what we look at to figure out what the story is that is leading to that behavior and like that cycle that can be happening.
Got it. I think the fear is not realizing my full potential. And to like forever be subpar is super scary.
Yeah.
So it's like, I know how, why am I not doing it? And that's where the guilt and the shame comes in. It's like, well, you've done this already. You should be able to do it at any time if you want to. And that's every area of life.
Yeah. And what would it mean? And we can go into, stop me if you don't want me to coach you.
Let's do it. This is magic being unleashed live.
I can't stop myself when we get started with this type of stuff. I just love it. So what does it mean if you're subpar? Like, what are you afraid is at risk if you are subpar? And
disappointing myself.
And if you disappoint yourself, then what's at risk?
It's like not having a life that was well lived.
Yeah. And so if you don't have a life well lived, then what is at risk there? Or what are you afraid would happen?
I don't know. I just like be a failure.
Yeah, this is something that is interesting. Like I've had some clients who have had similar stories to this as well, of like feeling like they just wouldn't live life to the fullest, or like there just would be, they would fail. And if they failed, then they would be rejected in some way. A lot of these stories and a lot of this that we work through has to do with belonging, or fear of rejection, failure, being alone, and things like that. And so what is interesting is, and so if we think about and we haven't necessarily defined your story to the fullest, but we have gotten to a little more clarity around it. But it served you in many ways, right? To be really accomplished and to be a go-getter and to be really motivated and to put yourself out there and to have a lot of success in a lot of areas. And then it can also be controlling in some ways when there are times where you feel like you're not being accomplished. And if you relate being not accomplishing to your fullest to being subpar and then being a failure in some way, then when that happens and it feels like you are subpar or if you're failing, then that's where it can be like a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it can be really hard to get back on track as well, because then that's where the story is more controlling you versus, and how it can be really helpful to rewrite that story to see that being subpar doesn't necessarily mean you're unsafe emotionally all the time and that you're always going to be a failure. And how in defining even what it looks like to be accomplished, and how do you want to define being accomplished? And does that have to be the same in all areas of your life? Or are there certain areas where it's really important to be accomplished and in other places it's okay, not necessarily to be subpar, but to not being accomplished to the fullest? Because if we're perfectionists, we might be thinking about having to be functioning at 150% all the time. But is that really realistic in all areas of our lives as well?
You're shaking your head no, but I'm like actually thinking about it.
This remind me of an analogy. Like, let's say, like, and it was a perfect. Michael Jordan is one of the best in basketball. What happened to him when he played baseball? In basketball, he's one of the greatest. In baseball, no. He gave it a try. But Michael wasn't Michael in that. Michael in his arena of basketball, he's a god in basketball.
And I'm curious how that messed with it, if that messed with his mind in some ways too.
I bet it did. I watched his documentary, and he was talking about it. He did it. One, he wanted to try it, and then two, people was telling him like, "Oh, you can't do this. There's no way you can be able to do this." And he did that, one, to prove to himself that he could, and also to prove the others that he wasn't able to do it. But he came to realization, okay, this is not for me. I can still play basketball. So he went back, and he actually had that time away to go explore himself even more, and came back even a more better player overall.
So interesting. So fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was also thinking too, as we were just talking about that, with going back to like that perfection and wanting to function at 150% at all times, to constantly being accomplished, that can show up even around food. And if we think about, a lot of people look at our food and our choices as all or nothing and in black and white. And if you think about, like, if we're somebody who wants to constantly being accomplished, it can be really challenging if we're trying to follow a specific way of eating or a specific diet. And that's where it's like, I have to be 100% perfect all the time. And anything less than that is failing. And that's not really realistic when it comes to eating and food, because what does perfection even look like? And I'm just bringing this up because I know, Kai, you were just pausing about functioning at 100 and not functioning below 150%. And is that okay? But when it comes to food, it can be really challenging if we don't necessarily have a clear idea of what does perfection look like. And I like to think about having some guardrails, and how do we stay within those guardrails and be a little bit flexible with it. And it's the same thing around food and our eating, but then also thinking about other areas of our lives too, where we want to be accomplished and we want to be functioning at a high level and at that 100% or around that 100%. But is there some flexibility, and is it okay if you're at 95% and not necessarily at 100% all the time?
That's cool. That's a great concept.
You're actually on a plan now, right? The eating plan.
Yeah. So recently I hired a nutritionist and a personal trainer Shout out to Laura and Victoria. And they've been really awesome. One of the things that Victoria, the nutritionist, helped me overcome is that, like, previously I would just do the meal plan, like, without fail, like 100% to the T. But what Victoria helps me with is like actually being like outspoken about what it is that really resonates with me at the time and what doesn't. And for me, I get caught in like, oh, well, am I now being super controlling with my nutritionist, or am I just speaking from, what my body is feeling in the moment? So I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm doing something.
Well, I think what she's encouraging you to do, which is awesome, is to not just accommodate her in the plan and to really think about what is it that I want and need and what does my body want and need. And that's another thing is, so I started talking about this unconscious cycle that we're in, and I talked about like the triggers and then the story, and then we have a stress response that comes up. And really quickly, it's a trigger, story, stress response. Then we have behaviors. We eat out of alignment with our goals. We lose self-trust, and then it loops back into the trigger. So that's often when we're feeling like we are self-sabotaging. If we're stress eating, emotionally eating, that's typically the cycle we're going through. Those stress responses, though, are to avoid, compete, or accommodate. And the accommodation one is where we're constantly putting other people's needs ahead of our own. We don't want to rock the boat. And it can be not only other people, but it can be a plan, a diet plan. It can be our jobs. It can be so many different areas where we're accommodating. And so being more aligned and more in tune with what it is that you need and want, that's where it's refocusing on you so that you can feel more aligned and not, if you're accommodating and thinking about just the plan and putting the nutritionist in the plan ahead of your needs, you're not going to be able to stick with it for long, because eventually you're going to hit a point where you're just depleted emotionally and physically from doing something that is not really in your own best interest. And so I love the fact that she's working with you to help you speak up more for what it is that you want and need, and that she's willing to adapt to that. That's really awesome.
Yeah, it's really, really helpful emotionally. I feel like I'm not like suppressing, all of these feelings, and that I get to actually talk about what comes up around the food.
That's awesome. I love that.
And I guess there's one more component to it.
Okay. I got a whole nother topic to talk about.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Oh, no. Go ahead. Your component. This is yours. Don't get away from this coaching. You better go in there, girl.
And thank you in advance, Laura, for answering all these questions.
Yeah. No, I love it. We could be on here for 3 hours. I would love to chat.
Okay, so I had like one straight up addiction, and that was eating ice. I'd eat ice because I like to chew, and ice is fun to chew. And then at the same time, I would also there's a cycle. I would eat the ice, then I would get really cold. And then in order to warm up, I would have to do something. And then that would take a lot of time. And then by the time I come back, and then it's like, oh, I want some more ice. And then just do it all over again, and end up not doing the things that I actually need to do. And what I've not been eating it really for the past month. But at the same time, I'm like, well, am I holding myself back from something that I just really like to do? Or is this something that's actually good for me?
Was there a certain time of day that you would chew on the ice? Or would it happen throughout the day?
Do you recall? From observation?
Did you even know this was an addiction for her?
I did, but it's like, now that it was definitely different times during the day that you would do that.
I would do it while I was working, or even at the end of the day. It's time for me to have my ice.
Yeah.
So it sounds really similar to the pattern just around when people overindulge or binge, but you were focusing, or you were going more towards ice. So there's two things that are coming up for me. around that is, one, if it's at the end of the day between work and like dinner or something, transitional points throughout the day can be challenging, especially if we are going from, I don't know if you guys have kids or not, but going from working to then being, some of my clients who have kids, having to be the sole caregiver or taking care of the kids, or just going from, it's that point of transition, as well as what I'd be so curious about now that we know around how like wanting to be accomplished is if there were points throughout the day where you were feeling like you weren't accomplished, and that's when you would chew on the ice. And one of the things that you said is it was like a way to distract and to make it so that you didn't have to do whatever was on your plate or on your to-do list. And so looking at those stress responses of the avoid, accommodate, and compete, the avoider one is where we build up our to-do list. We get into analysis paralysis. We it's the traditional procrastinator. And so a lot of times that will drive people to eat or chew on ice or something when they get to that point where they get overwhelmed by what they have to do. And so then it's like, well, I'm just going to go do this and eat or chew on ice so that I don't have to think about it. And it prolongs it a little bit. But then again, it feels like that self-fulfilling prophecy, because then it's, well, now I'm not accomplishing anything, so I'm not productive and I'm failing. And so I'm just going to go eat some more or chew on some more ice. And that's where it like gets into that cycle. And I don't know if that's exactly the pattern, but so there were, I guess, 3 things that came up for me as you were talking through that, is not feeling accomplished, avoiding, and then transitions. And so I'd be curious to hear if any of that resonates with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it might have been connected to like the overwhelm. And then, like you say, at the end of the cycle, when I realized that I'm actually not accomplished, and it's like, oh, let's go get some more.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So Dell, what was your other point that you were going to bring up?
This is going to be a collective question, because it's going to bring presence to what's going on, and also a reason for a lot of us, including myself, that I'm actually actively back in the gym, and that's called pandemic pounds. Mm-hmm. So around this for you, and I'm sure like some of your clients you're working with may have experienced through this, what are some things that you're hearing of the reason why people have gained so much weight during this time of the pandemic?
So one of the things I just talked about was transitions. And also when we were talking about the unconscious cycle and the stories that we have, I think it was Dave Chappelle said that we were quarantined with our issues. And, you know, a lot of what I've been hearing from people is a lot of my clients who are professionals in corporate environments and were traveling a lot, they always thought that once their routines changed and they didn't have to commute, they didn't have to be in the office all the time, they weren't traveling as much, they didn't have to go out to as many dinners or meals, or didn't have to entertain as much, then the stars would align and everything would be able to fall into place around their eating. And what they have found is that didn't happen as much as they thought it was going to. And in fact, in some areas, some ways they have gained more weight, or it just has gotten so frustrating because it's like things have changed. I'm home more, I'm cooking more, and yet I'm still not getting to the place that I want to. And like some of my clients who never used to go through the drive-through are now leaving the house to go through a drive-through, or those who are meal prepping and planning and have the food on hand are still ordering in. And so they're still finding these ways to have these patterns, even though things are aligned. And if we think about through the pandemic, talk about transitions and lack of safety, like our emotional safety has been at risk, our physical safety has been at risk. We're lacking connection now in some ways, or have to find new ways to feel connected to people. So a lot of people have been feeling isolated in some ways, as well as we're going through a huge transition constantly of being quarantined and then things opening up and then having to go back to quarantine, depending on where you are, obviously, in your state. And so there's like this constant flux and constant lack of safety, both socially, from social, physical, and emotional. And so those are times where we often turn to food and we'll eat, or we'll find it really easy to say, oh, screw it, I'm not going to go to the gym. I'm not going to do my online workout. And instead I'm going to watch Netflix on the couch and eat ice cream and cookies and chips instead. So that's a long answer to your story. It's a long answer to your question, but that is what I have been hearing and seeing a lot around what's been happening for people with the pandemic and quarantine.
Thank you. And so, something that's came into my mind as you were saying that too. Do you feel that also because of the quarantine and us not having the outside activities that we would normally have to stimulate ourselves, do you think also people could be eating because they're bored?
Yes. And I usually find that underneath boredom, there's usually something else. So for some of my clients being bored, it's usually, it can be that they're feeling like they're not being productive, if productivity is a big piece of it. And it could also be that they're just feeling isolated or disconnected or alone or lonely. And those are times where they'll eat too. So I've been like really touching on this cycle in like piecemeal, but to go back to the triggers that we typically experience that lead us to eat, it's usually feeling tired, anxious, inadequate, or lonely. And so if we're stress eating, emotionally eating when we're bored, it's usually those are 4 common ones. And then there can be other ones that come up for people of like not wanting to be exposed or things like that. But those are some of the common ones. And with anxiety, there's often uncertainty too, because we don't learn how to deal with uncertainty. And so talk about a year of triggers of uncertainty, feeling tired of being stuck in the same cycle over and over again, and then feeling that sense of loneliness potentially if you are triggered by inadequacy. I mean, the 4 common triggers are kind of like we've been experiencing them. The inadequacy one obviously can come up for people if they're feeling not enough or not good enough in certain areas of their lives. So the pandemic may not have brought that one to light as much, although with jobs and unemployment and the fact that people are having to put in so much more work and time, their jobs could be triggering that inadequacy. But those are the 4 common triggers that can definitely come up. But that's a piece typically, or there's something usually under that surface feeling of being bored.
Wow. The tip of the iceberg.
Wow. So when you work with people and they, identify these things, you're saying that, that's when you start to put in to place this action plan, where people can start to transcend these patterns?
Yeah, so they get tools throughout the whole process of how to sit with and feel some of that discomfort. Also, when we were talking earlier about the clarity and awareness of what is actually happening, just by understanding what's happening, like that client that I was talking about earlier, who is accommodating her family and her friends and her business, just by having that awareness, she was like, oh my God, first of all, it pissed her off because she's like, I don't want to accommodate and to put other people's needs ahead of my own. And then she's now speaking up for her needs and she's going to sleep earlier and she's not turning to food as much because of the fact that she's aware of what's actually happening. But then also throughout the whole process, there are tools of how to sit with some of this discomfort. And we work on testing new behaviors. So if you are somebody who really strives to be accomplished all the time, or if you are putting other people's needs ahead of your own, what is it like to speak up for your needs and doing it in a safe way that doesn't feel too vulnerable and too overwhelming, but does feel like a little bit of a stretch, and helping them to see that they can be emotionally safe and they aren't necessarily going to be seen as a failure because they don't always have the full, they're often making meaning of something that has happened or the way somebody's looking at them or something that somebody's saying, and giving them the tools so that they can collect the right information to see, is that really happening and is that the case, so that they can start to see that their lens of the way that they've been viewing things isn't always accurate, and giving them those tools so that they can start looking at it more accurately. And if they don't have the information, what do they need in order to get that information so that they can view it more from an accurate lens?
Thank you. It's super helpful.
You guys are asking such great questions.
Yeah. I'm asking for myself, but also just asking for people out there, because I know just how many people are going through this process of this relationship that they have with food, and with myself too. And we haven't touched that point as well. Just bringing awareness to the pandemic weight that I have gained myself. What also happened last year was the passing of my father due to COVID related symptoms. And I was emotionally eating for that as well. So it was like the comfort food. I was
Mhm.
having cravings for things that I used to eat with my dad as a child, to bring
Mhm.
back those memories. So is
Yeah.
that something that you've seen from other clients who may be grieving a loss of a family member, or maybe even like a breakup relationship? Would somebody potentially be eating for the sake of just feeling that connection again with the relationship?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that there's two camps, is like some people do go more into the eating for the comfort, and then some people just can't eat when they are going through some grief or process or a breakup, which is also grief. But yeah, I think that's really interesting, and something that you really touched on is that connection. It's a way to connect with your dad in when he's not here, as something that you used to share with him. And the food can definitely serve that purpose. And it also probably provides a little bit of comfort and nostalgia and stuff like that too. So yeah, it can definitely, food can definitely play that role as well. And I'm sorry for your loss too.
Thank you.
I'm curious, what does a healthy relationship with food look like then?
Yeah.
That's closing.
Yeah, it's a really great question. So I really like to think about it as coming from more of a place of neutrality around food, because it's not that you can't have a hamburger or french fries or ice cream at all. Like I still eat that stuff, but it's more of having it come from a place of neutrality and being able to eat a little bit, like eat within your alignment with your goals. So if you are comfortable eating a couple pieces of pizza and moving and are able to move on from it and not have a lot of buildup around it. So there's, and what I mean by that is a lot of times when we are consumed by the thought of food or are being controlled by it a little bit more, it's, I don't really want this pizza, but I do want the pizza. So I'm going to order the pizza, and then you eat the pizza. And then afterwards it's like, oh, I can't believe I just ate that pizza. Now I need to get back on track. And why did I do that? And I'm just going to eat, I'm just going to throw out the rest of the pizza. No, I'm just going to eat it. And so it's just like that mental gymnastics around food. And what we want to do is reduce that and come from more of a place of choice, where we are actually choosing whether we want to eat the pizza or not. And then being able to eat it, eat a little bit of it, and move on from that choice. And so that's what I really view as a healthy relationship with food. And then also, what has helped me and where I have gotten to is when I find that I am eating out of alignment with my goals, when that does come up, if I'm overeating a little bit of something, that is a sign to me, and it's a symptom that something is out of alignment somewhere else, and I need to explore that. So that's really helpful too, so that I'm not beating myself up and feeling like I'm losing willpower or discipline. And it just gives me the information and the data to then realize, wait a second, I need to take a step back here. Where is something out of alignment? How do I course correct that so it doesn't continue to snowball? And like if you think about how our relationship with food and our eating can be like a snowball, and once you start to go off track, it just like picks up the pace and momentum as it's going downhill, and it continues to grow and grow and grow. What we want to do is be able to catch it faster and stop it before it starts rolling downhill, and so that it doesn't gain momentum and we don't continue going down that hole. So as soon as we realize that there's something out of alignment, being able to catch it and then course correct that is really impactful and powerful.
Wow. Yeah.
I just had like this question that intuitively popped up while you're talking about it. It's like a universal, but it's a curiosity question too. I like to call myself a curious cat, so I get curious with some questions. But do you feel like, because you mentioned like when people eat the food and the shame and the guilt that they feel towards the food, and the energy and the emotion of shame and guilt is like a heavy energy that can happen. So do
Mhm.
you feel like if somebody eats the food, they have those heavy energies, it puts on the heavy weight onto them for feeling that?
Yeah, so it's so interesting because how we feel about ourselves and around food is there's so many metaphors that come up. And so it's really fascinating because when you were saying that, like, you feel weighed down, right? Like you feel weighed down by your food choices, but then you also feel weighed down by your body and stuff. And so, yeah, I mean, it can definitely, one of the things that I do when I'm listening to my clients talk is really listening to the words that they're using, because there's usually a lot of metaphors of what's happening. So, for an example, another one of my clients, she was in a pretty unhealthy relationship with her boyfriend at the time. And she was like, Laura, I just like eat and eat and eat, and I just can't stop. Like, I just keep filling myself up. And I asked her, I'm like, are you feeling depleted? And do you feel like your cup is empty? And she's like, oh my God, my cup is so empty that it's like broken and everything's just oozing out from out from it. And so if you think about food, like, she's literally trying to fill herself up because she's feeling so empty inside. And so she's using food to try to like fill that up. So it's kind of interesting with your question around being weighed down is, yes, it could be weighing you down, but it can also be a way to help ground, which if you think about like weighing yourself down, right, is to ground you if you're feeling ungrounded, or if you're feeling like you're completely depleted and like your cup's oozing everywhere, then it could be a way to try to fill those holes and to refuel yourself emotionally as well as physically. So there's so many metaphors and so many different aspects, and which is why I really love to listen to what people are talking about and how they're describing how they're feeling in their bodies as well as with food, so that we can see where those metaphors are that they don't even realize that they are saying.
Wow. Wow. What I got from that is how potentially overindulgence with food is substituting for you to fill yourself up
Mm-hmm.
with those emotions or whatever you feel like you need inside you.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so much more than just like we're lacking control or we're lacking motivation or discipline, right? Like if there's a deep emotional need there that's not getting filled and food can fill that, like, you have to have compassion for that person or for yourself, because it's not really that they're broken. Like, they might feel emotionally broken, right? But they're not really broken, and it can be fixed. And it is something that we want to address and see why that's happening and where is that coming from, so that we can help so that they don't continue to feel that way and don't need to continue to use food for that purpose.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
Oh,
you guys have I'm loving this conversation.
yeah. Likewise. The feeling is mutual.
Yes.
And we're about to close out soon, right?
Mhm.
Okay. So what we like to do before we close out is just allow our guests to just share one message that they will have for our audience. So whatever comes intuitively to you in this moment, something to share for our audience to take from this conversation, because it was a amazing conversation. So much learning, so much insight. Got to get a live coaching going on, and you're coaching both of us simultaneously. So it was amazing. So
Thank you.
what is that one message that you have for our audience?
The one message is that it can feel so isolating and lonely to be on this food journey and path. I hear so many people talk about how they are just stuck in their own heads around this. They don't feel comfortable sharing what they are going through and what is happening around food and all of the talk, the guilt, the shame, anything that's coming up. And so I just want you to know you're not alone. This is not unique. I mean, it is, your situation is unique, but I also hear a lot of the same things from a lot of my clients. So it's not a unique situation. You can get support for it if it's something that you want and could use and need. And there are other people who are going through similar situations. And so just don't be afraid to ask for help and to share what you're actually going through, because my guess is that there are other people in your world that are going through something similar as well.
Awesome. And where can people find you?
They can find me on my website, which is laurabfolks.com. And on there, I have an ebook and a whole bunch of other information about my programs and about me, and testimonials from clients, as well as they can schedule a curiosity call as well. So Dell, you were talking about being a curious cat, and I love that because I have the curiosity call where people can bring their curiosity and I bring mine to hear about what they're experiencing, what their challenges are, their goals, and just being able to open up and share about what's been swirling around in their minds. And would love to chat with you anytime you feel like you're falling off track and not able to be consistent. You can also send me an email and we can chat about that when you're feeling like you're falling off track. You can use me as a resource and email me at laurabfolks.com.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. This conversation has been a wealth of resources and information and just overall magic.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here and joining us. And also thanks to everyone out there who's listening and being inspired by Laura and our conversation. And of course,
Stay magical.